now that we got everyone introduced, let's jump right into the discussion proper.
You've heard what the professor has to say. What's your response?
Well, I don't understand what the claim that there's no such thing as biological sex means, and I certainly think it's, let's call it an error, to suggest that there's some sort of scientific consensus about that. I mean, there's biological differences between males and females in animals and human beings at every level of analysis.
Okay, I'm jumping in here, because what about the notion he put forward at the end there, that if you do not refer to people with the pronoun that they prefer to be referred to, that is a form, according to the Human Rights Commission, of discrimination?
It's not just a form of discrimination, it's a form of hate speech. That's why I made the video. I said that we were in danger of placing the refusal to use certain kinds of language into the same category as Holocaust denial, and suggested that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, especially since there's plenty of debate to be had about gender issues in our society, which I also think are also in danger of becoming illegal, and quite rapidly. So it isn't clear to me how long we'll be able to have the talk that we're having right now.
Here are
Can I jump in there? Can I jump in there on
Please?
the book? I think that's a common misconception about Bill C-16, that it's somehow going to make pronoun use into hate speech. If you actually look at the provisions, we're talking about very minor amendments to the criminal code. For example,
they're not minor.
section,
They put it into the hate speech category. They're not minor at all. That's a misstatement.
On that point, I think
So
there's
don't
a lot
tell
of
me they're
opportunity
minor.
here.
That's not
There's
right.
a lot of opportunity.
so section.
opening.
Kyle,
Yeah,
go
so
ahead.
Section 318, pardon me, so Section 318 sets out a series of identifiable groups, and we're talking about the clearest of cases, the cases of advocating genocide. And we have a series of groups that are already identified in the code, and all this does is add gender identity and gender expression to the categories that are already identified. And so I think we really have to add some reasonableness to this discussion, actually clearly articulate what the provision does.
Well, let me...
Okay, so he's kind of right and he's kind of right in my mind, because yes, if you think about how it kind of changes the law, it's very minor. It's very, because it only basically adds gender identity or gender expression to the things you are not allowed to discriminate against. For example, you cannot discriminate against sex, sexual preference, or for example race, ethnic, religion, etc. So yeah, it's only those, but it's the devil is in the details, because let's go how it's defined in the law, in this new law, definition of discrimination and harassment. Discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or impact, intentional or not, because of their gender identity or gender expression. So, like I said before, this can be almost anything. This could be that discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or something like that, because it's very broad, intentional, unintentional, etc. Well then, about harassment. Harassment is a form of discrimination, so it's kind of a subcategory of the discrimination. It can include sexually explicit or other inappropriate comments, questions, jokes, name calling, image, email, social media. Yeah, just throw in image, email, social media, no need to clarify. These are the clarifications, by the way. So these are not even, these are just clarifications for these words and what is considered discrimination and harassment, because that's mentioned in the law. But the real changes to the law, if you don't go into the details, it's very minor. Just adding couple of classes to the protected category. But then transphobic, homophobic, or other bullying, sexual and advances, touching, and other unwelcome or ongoing behavior that insults, demeans, harms, or threatens person in some way. So very, very, very broad. That's the problem.
Let me be a little clear about what some of the problems, what you might be asking for if you want to do this. For example, and Sheldon, bottom of page 3 here, let's put this graphic up. Pronoun misuse may become actionable through the human rights tribunals and the courts, and the remedies, monetary damages, non-financial remedies, for example, ceasing the discriminatory practice or reinstatement to the job, and public interest remedies, for example, changing hiring practices or developing non-discriminatory policies and procedures, jail time is not one of them.
Yeah, so they only want money when you misgender, not jail time.
Jordan, you're not going to go to jail if you keep this up. Do you find that reassuring?
What if I don't pay the fine?
Then what?
Then what? And let's talk about the legalities for a minute. As you know, the University of Toronto sent me 2 warning letters, right? And the second one basically asked me to stop talking about this.
Who sent the letters?
The first, it's the administration, fundamentally, the higher up people in the administration. The last one was the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science. But, you know, it's coming from the top end of the university.
And the letter said essentially you must call people by the pronouns they want?
The letters basically said that, and this is paraphrasing obviously, that as I'm required to abide by the university policies and the Ontario Human Rights Code, and there's a strong implication in the letter by having this discussion that I wasn't doing so, and so they're asking me to stop. And I can tell you also why they're asking me to stop apart from that. The codes as written make the university just as liable for my speech as I am.
Yeah, so there was that also. We didn't go into much of a detail there, but there was also in the end that all organizations are responsible for all individuals in that organization for their images and social media, etc. So totally unworkable law here. Example of a law here.
So not only is there a reasonable possibility that what I'm doing is uttering hate speech now under our law, but the university is legally responsible for that. And so I think they consulted with their lawyers and decided that maybe the claim that I was making in my video was correct. So I don't regard that as trivial, and I think that the lawyer who's discussing this is downplaying the significance of it tremendously.
Could I speak to the campus climate about this? Because
Go
I
ahead.
I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students.
Abusing students. So now he just wants to take this point to talk and just attack the another person, like totally randomly out of nowhere. Just attack him, brutal leftist coward tactic.
On campus,
To stop doing what?
abusing students
I see.
and other members of our learning community who do deserve respect and do deserve to be able to work and learn and contribute to society in a place where if they are physically assaulted, if they are
The assault so far came from the social justice warriors who are at this free speech rally, and almost 2 million people have
this
watched
is not
those
accurate.
so far.
This is not accurate.
Well, you can look
You
at
are
the
being
videos
actioned
yourself.
because people
We looked at the videos at the start of the episode, and it's accurate what Peterson is saying. What Peterson is saying, as far as I know.
have been making complaints about your behavior.
Yes, I understand that.
Yes.
That,
And so we're
Can I just
seeing
be
a
clear on
greater
something here, Nick?
opportunity for social justice happening
Nick, let
that
me be
many
cl-
people won't
Social justice, I want to see it happening.
understand.
Nick, can I be clear on something? You've accused him of abusing students by not using the pronouns they want to be addressed
That's
by.
how I see it, absolutely.
That is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely.
This is again the crazy thing that feminists have, that it's violence and it's abuse. The words are abusing me. They're just beating the crap out of me. They're just abusing me left and right all the time. Just making that, trying to say that words are a lot more damaging and horrible and terrible and more powerful, so that they can then shut them down, so that they can ban them from being used except on their means. That's just crazy.
Many global documents, many
how about violence?
organizations.
Is it tantamount to violence?
This is interesting. Is it tantamount to violence? Is it the same as violence as me hitting you if I misgender you?
Yes.
How about
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
hate
Absolutely.
speech?
Is it hate speech? Now we are getting into the really tough. I mean, hate speech. This is same as denying Holocaust also. So it's hate speech.
Is it tantamount to hate
Yes,
speech?
of course.
So yes, social justice warriors goes again. Yes, we want justice. Oh, I feel strong. Let's just take the heterosexual cis male out now. Just accuse him for everything and anything just to get him silenced.
Of course, it's hate speech
Fine,
to tell
that's-
someone that you won't refer to them as in a way that they that recognize.
it is whatever I can say it is, so that I can get rid of you or I can cause you more trouble. Whatever. Just bend everything to fit it into whatever you want so that you can cause trouble in society. Now, this is why the law is a bad idea.
Is their humanity and dignity.
Mary, let me get you in on this at this point.
Sure.
You got something you want to say, or can I put a question to you?
Both. Go ahead.
Okay.
For the question.
You're a writer, Mary.
I am.
I know you care about free speech because you're a writer.
Yes.
Does Jordan Peterson have a little place in your heart because he's arguing free speech here?
I think the interesting thing about Jordan and how I feel about his video, and Jordan and I actually had an opportunity to talk at length before I wrote the Walrus article. And he sails really close to things that I think people can relate to. And I think that we all want to have, an open discourse. We want conversations to unfold.
We want open discourse, we want conversations to unfold, but we just want to shout you down. We want to have the conversation on our terms, on our rules. You are not allowed to say your hateful opinion. You are not allowed to debate that. We need the control. We are the victims. Please pity us, give us all the control, please. Please control now for us, please.
We want people to feel like if they have something to say, if they have a question, they can ask it, that they're not going to be censored. But he sails really close and then right past it, and that's where he and I part ways. Because what I don't really understand is when you listen to the video, he piles a lot of things into the basket of using the pronouns that people want. And it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of his anxieties, and he talks about being fearful and anxious in his video, that somehow there's a cabal of trans activists who have so much power that they are going to basically, using the pronouns that people want and capitulating to these demands, sort of pulls out the Jenga, the critical Jenga piece of the Western canon, right? I mean, basically, Jordan is arguing that this is going to create chaos and anarchy, and that it's essentially a Marxist plot.
So, this must be straw, man, right? I mean, you would think so, right? Like, no one can be serious about that. There's a leftist cabal plotting a Marxist revolution right under our noses. Oh my God.
That is there to sow violence and there to sow confusion and topple any kind of hierarchy.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Is that an accurate characterization of your view on this?
I listened really closely to that tape.
Okay.
I think it is.
Is it, in your view, has she accurately characterized where you're coming from?
It's not a transsexual cabal by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a...
Oh my God! It wasn't a straw man! Well, I have to give her credit now that, yeah, you could listen to it like that, and I guess it's not identifying his, basically, what he's trying to say, but it's very odd thing to make a point about, I think.
The cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists, and they're making...
And they're all underpaid, so don't worry.
Well, they could pick higher-paying occupations if they wanted higher-paying occupations, but...
Because sexism does not exist. Are you kidding me?
Let's not get off topic here, folks.
I
Go
think
ahead,
we're
Mary.
directly on point.
Mary, come on back.
So I think Jordan has conceded that I think I've grasped his concern. At the very least, I've grasped the concern, and that there is a kind of chipping away at order as we come to know it. The other thing that Jordan and I have in common is a real interest in language, and the idea of what can happen when language changes, when it evolves. And, I was thinking, before I came here, I was thinking about, I grew up in the Bronx, and I was born in '61, so I remember very well when we went from Mrs. to Ms., and my father was appalled, and he kept saying Ms., and he thought that was funny, because if you couldn't actually identify somebody as either, particularly a female, as either married or single, then
The notion
chaos,
the
right?
notion of characterizing a woman independent of her marital
That's
status
right.
was controversial at the
and
time.
apparently very, very confusing. And so I'm reminded of that when the suggestion is made that somehow if we have words that don't fit into something that we're very familiar with and that we've used to date, that chaos will ensue, that everyone will be confused. I don't believe that. There's no evidence of that historically.
I hear you, but there was no law obliging people to use the word
Actually,
Ms.
but there were laws to oblige people to change the way that we referred to black people, for example. You know, there was a time when there were any number of words that we now can only say as letters. Can I say them on TVO? People were called darkies, niggers, coons, in polite company. And that evolved. Those things changed. When I was a teenager, people were still using those words.
So this is a natural evolution in your view?
This is a natural evolution, and chaos will not
ensue.
ensue.
It's a natural evolution, then we don't need hate speech law to enforce it.
But we obviously we do, because we can drive social change, and it doesn't all have to lead to chaos, is my point. And I think that, you know, we have seen the flip side of Jordan's argument, I think, has in fact, we do have a historical record of that. So when it was left to others to name people, we lost Indigenous names. I come from, my mother's from Ireland. She was from a generation that finally got to learn her own language again. She couldn't even speak Gaelic to her parents because they hadn't been allowed to speak it. So we know, we've seen the effect when people can't use their own language, when they can't use their own names.
Okay, let me get Jordan to respond to that. A natural evolution of things, Jordan. That's how it's being described.
Words are tools. Maybe that was one of the great philosophical discoveries of the 20th century. And that means, and people are always looking for new tools to operate in the world. And if you invent a good tool, like a new word, then people will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.
Let me get Theron to weigh in. Theron, you've been hearing the debate here in the studio. Why don't you weigh in and pick it up?
Well, I guess I'm in the same boat as Dr. Peterson when it comes to being guilty of a hate crime or a hate speech infringement, because, I mean, I draw the line somewhere. For example, I refuse to use pronouns like sie, them, zer. I don't have a problem using they, them, their pronouns, and that also happens just to be because of the circles in which I move. I happen to know people who use gender-neutral pronouns, so I've gotten used to it. But the vast majority of people are not going to come into contact with the incredibly small fraction of the population of gender non-binary people. And that's why this is never really going to pick up, in my opinion. You know, when it comes to Mrs. and Ms., at least half of the population is female, so there was some interaction with the term Mrs. versus Ms. And there were some interactions so people could pick it up. There just aren't enough gender non-binary. I use that in quotation marks because I hate that term, because it's a political term, not a gender identity or a term of identification. It's just a political term. But regardless, I don't think it's going to pick up. There's just not enough of these people to interact with.
The Twitter sphere has been buzzing with this conversation, and let's just pull one up here. Let's pull up one tweet. This was tweeted to a number of people, including, as you can see in the middle, Jordan B. Peterson, who's on our program tonight. I so look forward to Bill C-16 putting your kind of silly trolling to an end, it says. There are people, let's go to our Professor Kyle in Ottawa. There are people out there who hope that C16 lives up to Jordan's worst fears. Do you agree that C16 ought to be able to prevent people from expressing negative opinions about transgender people?
So first I want to clarify that Bill C-16 only applies to federally regulated entities. So for example, the University of Toronto is under provincial jurisdiction, so is therefore subject to the Ontario Human Rights Code. So I think that's an important point to note. I also want to note there's been a lot of talk about the hate crimes that seems to be like kind of an American import into our discussion. The only two changes that this Bill C-16 make are to make minor amendments to Section 318 and 718 of the Criminal Code. The first is advocating genocide, as I've talked about, a very, very extreme high standard. And then second off, at sentencing, after an offense has been committed and a person has been found guilty, what 718 does is it tells judges that they ought to treat hate motivation as an aggravating factor at sentencing, to treat that as a more severe form. And currently we have a series of identities that are set out in 718, things like sexual orientation, race. We don't have currently gender identity and gender expression there, and so that's what this do. So I just want to make it very clear that we ought not to be importing American concepts into the discussion here. And so to the extent that Bill C-16 makes changes only to, in the Canadian Human Rights Act context, to federally regulated entities, which is not the University of Toronto.
Nicholas, let me follow up with you. Why, in your view, do you think the trans community needs this kind of legislative protection?
Well, thank you. That's basically the point that hasn't been raised yet, which is that people are actually suffering huge lack of access to resources that will allow people to survive. So people are being physically assaulted. People do not have counselors that they can go to who are not going to, as Dr. Peterson has done on YouTube, recommend that they actually become more anxious and more upset about situations.
They don't, it shouldn't be that do I or other people choose to use they or she has nothing to do with, for example, their housing. Like, it would be really odd kind of a mess in bureaucratics if that people in their speech are using or not using he, she, they, she somehow affects that you cannot get a housing. So you are just mixing stuff up and then muddying the water in a way that it seems more legitimate your case than it actually is.
People are being assaulted. I brought all sorts of really...
Yes, they are being assaulted because I don't use she and they.
Really depressing stats that people who are leaning towards thinking that this is not that big of a deal, those people need to look at those stats. But many people...
Give us one stat.
Yeah, so 58% of students could not get academic transcripts with their correct name or pronoun.
So this is one of your serious questions here. So 58% don't get their academic credentials with their preferred pronouns. They still get their academic credential. It didn't help or hinder them in any way except that they weren't, by the state or the university, they didn't felt being treated special. That their own individual snowflake, super special mega mix didn't get there in the papers. And that's a problem. Why? It really doesn't affect anything. Like, how does that, how could it affect your job or housing or whatever? I mean, I know you are paranoid and think that you are being attacked and all these things, but to go from that you don't get your academic credentials in a certain way, like for example your Majesty or she or they or attack helicopter or whatever, then please explain to me if I'm wrong, but I don't see how it could affect your getting your job or etc. Your things you need in society, or how it would discriminate you in any bad way, except that there's that one word either there or missing or different than you would like.
That causes a huge chain of events for...
Huge chain of events, like It's a huge chain of events when you put your diploma on your wall in your house. Huge chain of events. There's one word differently, and it affects clearly nothing if we are being reasonable and not being discriminating against trans people. And we shouldn't discriminate against trans people, don't get me wrong, but we shouldn't make them feel special either, or go out of our ways to make them feel special, or the society shouldn't, because then they just seem to, I guess, kill themselves when someone misgenders them or something. I don't really even get it, but basically it seems to be the plea that, oh, I'm such a poor victim, oh, victim, please give us all the power to change law and shape language.
Students or anybody who's had any kind of academic training, as everyone recognizes, we need to be able to have references, we need to be able to have resumes, we need to be able to...
You can have your resume, you can have your references, even if people don't use say or they. I promise you, you can do it. You can find a way. People don't want to discriminate against trans people, I don't think so. So you will find a way to make it work. You don't get those problems.
To get jobs.
So I want to be sure that I'm clearly understanding your point here, which is, and therefore they feel disrespected, and therefore this affects their life in a very real way? Is that right?
The feeling of disrespect is not as important as the ways that people in authority are able to circumvent the possibilities for living. So it has more to do with not being able to find housing and therefore being homeless.
How is finding housing got to do with anything about if you are being called C or J? And this means gender problem. Yes, you shouldn't be discriminated against, but why is this law set up in this way? Why can't it just be about that that you are not being discriminated for a job or housing or etc.? Because I don't see the relevance. I don't see how this even has to do with that. Would some university professor or someone else call them Z or they? People seem to be talking all over on top of each other differently. No one connects to the matter at hand, it seems.
Has more to do with not being able to get jobs because people are discriminated against. So we're not actually we shouldn't be talking about free speech. What we should be talking about are the social issues.
We shouldn't be talking about free speech.
She's facing people who are being discriminated against, and what that looks like on campus, which is that some professors refuse to offer basic dignity to students and colleagues. And that leads to people missing classes, it leads to people dropping out, it leads to a lack of positive opportunity for society to actually benefit from the contributions of many, many people. And I also don't teach that there's a huge divide between trans people and non-trans people, because I would say the number is 100% of people will benefit from more open discussion. And one of the problems is that it's being addressed in a black and white way. So it's too bad that we can't actually have an open conversation.
Well,
because
we can't have open conversation. So to have an open conversation about this law actually needs to first be in place because of reasons, I guess. People can then, when this law is in place, they will feel safe and protected, and they can come and talk about it freely. But we can't have any of this good party free stuff if we don't put this totalitarian Orwellian law in place. Then we can have whatever you want, but just let we victims, just let us have power, please, power, please. Then we can talk. We promise to talk when we are in power. Yes, we'll talk. Put us in power.
a huge wall of violence between us.
Here is somebody who did not share your view on that, because we invited another guest to be on the program today, and this person initially said yes, and then sent a Facebook message to our producer, Wojtek Schemberg, saying, you know what, changed my mind. Giving Jordan Peterson this platform serves to legitimize his views, which are based in bigotry and misinformation. The humanity and rights of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people are not a matter of debate, and holding a debate which places a false equivalency between the views expressed by Peterson and the human rights concerns of the trans community would be an act of transphobia. Therefore, none of us wish to participate in this. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. That's a very important perspective.
That's why I read it. I wonder whether, Jordan, everybody's talking past each other here. You are trying to make a point about free speech. The other
I
side.
think we're talking past each other.
Well, but the
Steve.
others, you're trying to make a point about free speech. The other side is trying to make a point about the rights, the human rights of trans people. That's not the point that you're trying to make. Do we have two different groups here that are trying to make two different points, and they find themselves in the same bowl of soup, and that's why this has turned into the conflagration it has?
Well, it's partly that, because the issues we're discussing have to center on some actual issues, and they happen to be centering on the issue surrounding transgender language. But I don't think we're talking past each other at all in a fundamental sense. I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome.
Yes, I seem to be seeing this in a lot of, also in Finnish, what they are starting to teach in for elementary students and about equality. So, not about equality of opportunity, not that the children get to choose where they want to do their work, but just that equality of outcome, that do these mild little tweaks there and do these to free speech and do their whatever, so that we can guarantee that everyone has equal good stuff in society or something.
And we need more than one value, first of all, if we're going to survive as a society, because you can't solve every problem with the same approach. But there are more insidious things, in my estimation, going on underneath. I mean, even the missive that you just read said that, well, even providing me with a platform, let's call it, to express my views, is something that shouldn't be allowed. It's like, yes, that's why I made the video. It was because many people are claiming that the expression of these sorts of views should no longer be permitted. And it's this view for now, but this is a minor issue in some ways compared to the larger issue that's at stake, which is our right to have discussions of this sort at all. Like, I mean, one thing that happened right when we started this was that there was an initial claim, for example, that there's no such thing as biological sex. Well, I believe quite firmly that if we continue on our present path at the universities for 5 more years, that's a discussion we will not actually be able to have on campuses.
So, prediction here, remember this, in 5 years, in Canadian campuses, you cannot talk freely about the biological sex. True or false? We'll see in 5 years.
Because it will be
by fiat, I mean, the legislation already implicitly presumes that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression, which we haven't even talked about yet, vary independently. That is simply not true.
Theron, the person who sent that Facebook message thinks that we're partaking in transphobia just by having this debate. I hope that's not the case. But I wonder if you could give us your explanation for why some people adamantly refuse even to have this discussion, that the notion of having this discussion is somehow transphobic.
I think it has to do with there's a lacking when it comes to actually being able to defend your points through argument. So if you open up the discussion for argument, they know they will lose. I think it's absolutely ludicrous and insane to say that having this discussion is by default transphobic. I think it's even more it's equally ludicrous to call Dr. Peterson what he said transphobic. I think it takes using that term so willy-nilly. It takes the emotional response to a term like transphobia and connotates it with something as in my opinion, productive as having an open discussion. And I think that's very insidious, and I think that's very manipulative.
Kyle, are we being transphobic here by having this debate?
Well, I do worry about setting up a false equivalency in this conversation, and really even making the premise that trans lives are up for debate. They're not up for debate. Human rights aren't up for debate. And the reason that I agreed to be on the program is that I've been very troubled by the misinformation about what the law is actually going to do. And so I really grappled with whether or not I wanted to participate in this discussion. But I thought it was very important to really try to dial back the hateful rhetoric and actually do a very careful discussion about what the law is actually designed to achieve, and ultimately to promote a more equitable and just society. So we've talked about freedom of expression, to use the Canadian term, but we should also be talking about other values like equality and anti-racism, I think.
Just curious, Mary, I'm going to get to you one sec. I am curious, though. You've now participated in 90% of the program. We're just about done. Was it a good idea for you to come on?
I think that it's an opportunity to try to work through some of the legal issues, the social and human rights and equality issues, and so I'm happy to be here. But I recognize that other people's experiences, they might find ultimately that participating in this program was a mistake.
Mary,
Only
you wanted
time
to
will
follow
tell.
up.
Well, I certainly want to say that Kyle, I found that what you brought to it in terms of putting the bill into perspective actually really helpful and probably helpful to a lot of people. So I'm glad that Kyle was here. I think for me, one of the things that I felt anxious about coming in, and I'm still puzzling over, why this issue? Why this issue? So, and I do think, at the risk of bringing in the United States again, there does seem to be a similarity between some of the rhetoric we're hearing down south right now through the election and this. It feels like it's greatly exaggerated. Sort of what will fall out from this, and we're sort of, it feels like a bit of a tempest in a teapot. I don't see the connections that Jordan is making, and as a person who identifies as transgender, it's very, very confusing that this is somehow up for discussion.
You saw the tape at the beginning of the program of the. I mean, he tried to give a speech at a university campus, and was really quite mercilessly shouted down.
And that would be one of the places where Jordan and I would have some common ground in that there has been a trend in some ways for people to allow no platforming, and this person's views are objectionable and we don't want them to come on the campus.
What do you think of that?
I think it's probably best not discussed in the context of someone's personal identity, right? So that's part of what I'm bothered by this discussion. So
But if you can't have a discussion about free speech on a university campus, then I guess you can't have one, because that's supposed to be where they happen, isn't it?
I agree with you. I think that is a problem. What I'm trying to say is that, those issues came up around issues of someone who was pro-Israel who wanted to come onto a campus. Those things are political. My identity, my personal identity, my gender identity is very separate from my political identity. And so it's very strange to have this to be where we're going to plant the flag and say, enough with this crazy political correctness. You don't get to choose your pronouns.
I thought
it seems trivial to me.
I thought it was an axiom, say, of feminism, for example, that the personal was political. And isn't that that's a famous phrase, the personal is political.
Okay,
The
but
personal is political when someone is attacking you on a basis that is personal and that you can't change about yourself. That is political. And that's when people sometimes become politicized, is when they realize that no matter what they do in the world, there will be people who will continue to attack them on racist grounds, on gender and sexual violence grounds, and that's why people start to fight back, and that's why people object.
And your attempts.
And you can talk about your individual experience, etc. This actually very well defines this person's debating style, because he just comes out right and attack you personally, not really much with arguments, except some bullshit rhetoric about victims, etc. So that is interesting. So the personal is the political, it's at least what you are doing.
And your attempts to regulate my language use, and
I don't care about
repeated.
your language use. I care about the safety of the people who are being harmed.
I know people who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
I'm concerned with my own safety. Just so that people are aware, my physical, emotional life and livelihood is at risk from being here. And that's not true of everyone.
In comparison to mine, say.
I don't know about yours because
Yes,
I don't
you do.
live
You know
your life.
perfectly well about mine.
I do
You
know
know
that you have
about the
tenure
letter.
and that's one of the major ways that you're able to do this. But I just want people to be aware that trans and gender diverse communities, and especially people of color, are being targeted and threatened physically. So free speech is a great idea and equality is a great idea, but
Free speech is a great idea, but let's just remove it.
we actually can't have those conversations when people are not even able to be present.
Jordan, let me read
Yeah, right. Just give us this law and we'll promise we'll keep a discussion.
this tweet to you, and I'll get you to respond to it, because I think it's instructive of the conversation that just took place between the two of you. Can someone please explain to Jordan B. Peterson that there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom from consequence? Do you agree there's a difference?
Well,
This is just rhetoric. Everyone says that, but of course there is a difference there, but freedom of speech should give you freedom to say stuff so that bad stuff doesn't happen to you when you stay inside the line. And I really don't think Jordan Peterson has crossed that line in any way. He just wanted to debate about the upcoming law, talk about the differences and why it might be a problem for the society, etc. So now that you've spit out your bullshit rhetoric, do you have anything else?
Certainly, there's a difference.
And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that.
What does that entail?
Are you open to learning?
Well, hang on.
That's not the question.
Hang on, that wasn't the question.
It's
That's
true.
right.
Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal
Ooh, that bald guy really wants to teach this guy.
is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position. But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization. That's what I believe.
Do you have tenure?
I do. And
So they can't fire you for this?
well, it's not all that easy to figure out what people can and can't do. If I'm, certainly they could fire me if I was, let's say, if the hate speech allegation, so to speak, stuck. I mean, the university's been quite reasonable about this, especially compared to many universities. We're going to have a debate.
I was just going to say, we got a minute left, and I do want to give it to Jordan, because the university has not said entirely, shut up, we don't want to hear this anymore.
No, well, I went and talked to the dean on Friday, and I sat down with my family, and I thought, okay, what would be the best way for this to go for everyone? For me, and for my students, and for the university, and for society. I thought, okay, well, really, obviously there's an issue here, several of them, because otherwise all of this noise wouldn't have emerged. So we should actually have a debate about it.
And that's happening?
Yes, so I went and talked to the dean, David Cameron, who was a very reasonable person, and I said, look, well, I think the University of Toronto should take a leadership position on this, and there's issues to be discussed here.
So who are you debating?
Well, that remains to be seen. I haven't seen people flooding out of the woodwork to debate me so far.
Do we have a date, place, and time yet?
We don't. It'll be on the campus. It'll probably be on a morning in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. You let me know. We'll tweet it out there.
I will let you know, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's our time, I'm afraid, everybody. I do want to thank everybody for coming in tonight, and I hope you found it was worth your while. We certainly found it, I think, a very useful exercise.
Resources for people?
Sorry?
People who just watch this program may be really in need of something.
Sure. You got a website?
Yeah. I would really encourage people to go to transformingjustice.ca. It's a current research initiative that will appeal to anyone with any interest in research and learning.
Say it again,
transformingjustice.ca.
We are happy to put that out there.
Thank you.
Theron Meyer, the trans pundit and YouTuber in Vancouver, Kyle Kirkup, the professor of law at University of Ottawa. We thank both of you for being outside our studio but part of our broadcast tonight. Jordan Peterson at the U of T, Nick Matt from the U of T, Mary Rogan. You can read more about this in her piece, Growing Up Trans, in the October issue of Walrus Magazine, on better bookstore and corner store stands everywhere. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO.
This was very interesting debate, and I wanted to go through it all the way and give some perspective on some places, and I think there were good points in there all the time. So, thank you for joining me this time, and see you again in some time.